Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's such a privilege to be alive as a human being, even in the very strange times that we presently experience. There may be a little bit of wind noise today. I didn't bring my wind muffle. So, thank you for bearing with the extraneous sound. I am in the botanical gardens at the moment, and the sun is shining very beautifully on all the greenery. And there are many things on my mind. I'm not sure which of them I will attend. But I'd like to begin by talking about and exploring the idea of make-believe and how powerful that is when we are able to deeply imagine ourselves in ways that differ from our usual rational and pragmatic thought. When I was a child, Mr. Rogers was still alive. And while his presentations weren't quite as exciting as the violent and perhaps violently hilarious cartoons we called Looney Tunes, which he deeply opposed. He felt that we were poisoning our children by teaching them that violence was hilarious. And I love Looney Tunes, and I'm a huge fan of hand-drawn animation. In fact, I can't stand most computer animation, which now has colonized the field so thoroughly that it's nearly all of what we will commonly encounter when we see cartoons. Cartoons are a form of make-believe. And in that, they resemble certain features of dreaming, which is perhaps the most profound form of make-believe we are likely to experience, unless we decide to experiment with our humanity. And by experiment, I mean to make believe that something that isn't rationally a fact might be either a lot of fun or very inspiring or enlightening or maybe even truly magical. I learned something once in these gardens. I was observing birds, particularly birds that were hunting insects. And by approaching the angle from which one of the birds was viewing the grassy area in which it was hunting, I realized something rather astonishing. That the bird was selecting an angle from which to follow, in a sense, reflections. In other words, it was selecting an angle in relation to the sun that would cause small flying insects to light up in its vision almost as if they were shooting stars. From many other angles, the insects were nearly invisible, if not completely invisible, and certainly invisible to my eyesight. But from this angle, I could see that each of the insects it captured and consumed lit up. And they lit up because it selected a particular perspective that literally highlighted insects flying through this angle of light. And this is so important because it's an analogy of something in consciousness, in thought, in concern, in our creative engagement, in our attention, in our cognition. There's another feature that's similar, which is what I call gaze spreading. This is when we relax our foveal or focused vision so that we are paying closer attention to the periphery of our visual field rather than the center or the focus. Now, as I'm walking right now, it's almost as if it is lightly snowing sideways because the sun is lighting up little floating seeds. And their frequency is not the same as snow, but the atmosphere is filled with them, and they are sparkling. When we change the purpose for which we are looking or pursuing or thinking, something almost magical and sometimes actually magical, and by magical I mean not necessarily metaphysical, but unusually powerful, occurs. And there are certain angles of approach to seeing, both in the sense of our actual visual experience, but also in the sense of our interiority. Our interiority can be likened to an array of different eyes. And the eyes we select to enhance the vision of or to pay attention to radically alter what we perceive. In the night sky, if we spread our gaze so that we relax the foveal vision, if it is relatively clear and stars are visible, a peculiar phenomena may arise in our experience, which is there are some stars that we can only see by looking indirectly at them. Our peripheral vision registers them clearly. Our foveal vision, if we focus on them, they disappear. And this is such an important principle because there are vast dimensions of our humanity and our potential that are obscured to us when we are singularly focused. If you look at your hand, you will notice that you don't have one finger. And if you did, your hand would be nearly useless.
It's a big tractor.
We have 5 fingers, and within ourselves we have many kinds of eyes, in a sense, that we can form, enhance, and synthesize or synergize together. And it's that synergy of multiple approaches at once that is most productive of learning, of insight, of wonder, of awe, perhaps of awareness itself. When Mr. Rogers was on TV, as I mentioned, it was kind of boring compared to the short attention span theater of Looney Tunes. But it was also very profound because he was so emotionally present and rich and soft. And he had a little trolley car that we would follow into the land of make-believe, which was a land of puppets and imaginary friends. And that was a more exciting, for me, aspect of his presentations. So what I am asking us to do is to become aware of the almost infinite field of playful make-believe and how powerful that can be when we play with deep authenticity, wonder, curiosity, inspiration. Often, when I was younger, when I was engaging in what we might call ordinary activities, such as a long drive, or going to the store, or doing the laundry, I would sometimes imagine something that might seem absurd, particularly to the mind that values the pragmatic, the rational, the quotidian. I would imagine that I was a secret agent. And sometimes I would imagine that other agents were pursuing me, or that I was pursuing them, and that I had an urgent mission. And this practice would radically enrich my experience of the otherwise relatively dead inside behaviors, priorities, evaluations, and activities that I was engaged in. Now, what I want to highlight here is that there are some forms of experiment, creativity, and artistic play at being human, or perhaps at being more than human, which is surely most of what we actually are. There are forms of make-believe that are more true in their spirit and result than anything pragmatic could ever be, because they include a vaster dimensionality. Now, many of us have experiences of having something resembling a dream or a vision of the future for ourselves. And often, in my experience, these dreams or visions slowly become true, even though they clearly are a form of make-believe, a fantasy. Now, fantasy cannot always walk us through the complex representational behaviors and necessities of our ordinary lives, but they can be incredibly helpful, and sometimes it might be more important to be imaginative and creative than it is to be merely pragmatic and rational. You know, we have in our time some wooish cults around the idea of what is referred to as manifesting. And this is a strange collapse of the dimensionality of an aspect of our being that is important, but also resists capture by representations. And in these cult-like conglomerates of ideas, in these thrisps, what's really going on is mostly attempting to capture something ephemeral and magical into a system. And I guess I find that troubling, because the more that systems become the focus of our dreaming experience, the less we are dreaming. And often in dreaming, which is truly a magical adventure of unusual dimensional forms and relationships, the onset of systematicity portends the end of the dream. And having paid a lot of attention to dreaming, I am aware of this problem, deeply aware. Now, some of you might realize that in this discussion, in a sense, I am doing what I recommend. I am imagining and playing at the beyond of my regular everyday humanity. And though I'm speaking about it, I am also aware of the beyond of my ordinary thought, perspective, concern, and activity. So in a very real sense, I'm on an adventure right now. And in another sense, I am dreaming while I am awake. I am dreaming of ways of seeing. What is it inside us that we change our relationship to when we begin to experiment and adventure together, or even alone? I'm not really sure that true aloneness is possible, but something resembling it is certainly possible in representational thought, behavior, our cultures, which are mostly anti-cultures, especially in America, and our societies, which again don't much resemble actual societies. Fundamentally, we might be changing our relationship to the purposes, and I use the plural and highlight that, in perceiving. And it is as if the many different kinds of eyes within us make a form of light, a form that might be familiar to us if we examine or if we explore whatever it is that illuminates our dreams. In our dreaming, there is something analogous to light that, by the virtue of which our dreaming experiences are illumined. And it is not probably a single thing, though it may be viewed that way, in the same way that our actual visual experience is not a single thing. And our feelings, our thoughts, our concerns, our inspirations, our insights are radically transformed when we change the purpose or the purposes for which we are looking. And those purposes determine, or they have a determinative implication on what will appear within our awareness and emotions, even within our bodies. Perhaps I got that backwards, that the first result is in our bodies. The purposes change what our bodies experience. And when we pay close attention to our bodies during our experience of what we call perceiving, we will notice astonishingly rich, often deeply nuanced and subtle physical transformations. Meditation is an example of a purpose that enlarges the aperture by both enacting extreme focus, as in the focus one might give to a Zen koan, but also removing layers of what we might think of as ordinary purposes, concerns, thoughts, and so on. So simultaneously there's a buffering and a focusing. Now this might all sound very abstract, but one of the things I'm trying to highlight here is not merely that changing our angle of approach by transforming our purpose for looking, exploring, doing, but also introducing multiple perspectives. And one of the human behaviors that embodies this goal is the play of children. There's a powerful resemblance to the priorities of dreaming in the play of children. I sometimes bring peanuts with me into the gardens because there are a number of corvids here that know me in a very different way from how humans know me. To them, I am the one who brings peanuts. And they recognize me and remember me, even if they have not seen me for years. And one of them, a male jay. It's not a scrub jay, what is it? I can't remember. Has just come to my hand to take a peanut from me. Now, if I was not adventurous, I would never have discovered, if I wasn't experimenting, I would never have discovered that wild birds will come and land on my hand. And this is a truly magical experience because it bridges two peoples, the humans and the Stellar's jays in this case, also the scrub jays. I have fed large ravens by hand. I have fed, though they don't come to my hand the way the jays can. The jays are much smaller. And let's face it, human hands are the danger. For all animals, it's not necessarily humans that are the danger, it's their hands and what they can do with them. So to create a situation where a bird is willing to violate most of its survival instincts is pretty magical. And it's certainly an amazing experience to feel the feet of the Stellar's jay on my fingertips while it briefly lands to get a peanut. But what it's getting isn't just a peanut, and what I'm receiving isn't just the feeling of the bird's legs and the transformation of the atmosphere around its wings on my palm, the flows and currents of its flight. When we come together in this way, which is also dangerous for both of us, there is a bridge between our peoples. Now, ordinary humans are not inclined to think of insects and trees and animals and living places as peoples, but ancient and indigenous peoples most often did precisely that. And since they thought of them as peoples, it became very challenging for them to engage in merely extractive or omnicidal behavior. They understood that you cannot take from a people without giving. They understood the sacred formation of the bridge, the between of us, the beauty, to create beauty in the between of us, which I would argue is a form of truth that supervenes over all of rational truth, all of facticity. One day, during a storm, I snuck into the gardens via a route I was aware of because it was closed. Actually, it wasn't during a storm, it was after it. And many of my favorite trees, a large number of them, had fallen during the storm, and I wanted to visit the trees. And I was feeling some degree of doubt and despair about myself and my relationship to life while I was in the garden visiting the trees. And so I formed a prayer, which is a form of make-believe. Unless the gods, or God, or the living places, or the animals, or the sun, or the moon, unless they speak to us directly, which does sometimes happen, but very rarely unless we can make believe that it might. I offered a prayer to nature herself, as if she were one being, a magical being, a metaphysical being. And I prayed, please help me. I am lost. And I hope for a sign that you are still with me, that you still know me, that the bridge between us is alive and real and true. And shortly thereafter, some workers in the garden saw me, and they were very upset with me for being in the garden. and told me to leave immediately. I think they considered calling rangers. And I'll come back to that word in a moment. Shortly after my prayer, I found on the ground a couple of peanuts. And I thought, for some reason, that perhaps if I cracked the peanuts together gently and made the sound of peanuts, jays might come. And I had never had this experience before, at least not in my recollection. But I began to do that. I tapped the peanuts together and made that sound they make of their hollow shells. And then I held my hand up with a peanut in it, looking ahead of me. And from behind me, a jay came and landed on my hand and took the peanut and flew away. And I was astonished. And I felt that nature had answered my prayer. I can imagine many rational objections, but I also remember the actual feeling. And it was beautiful and profound. When we are willing to make believe, we expand the dimensionality of our ordinary humanity, and this creates new possibilities for experience, knowledge, insight, relation, wonder, and reassurance. Whatever nature may be, whatever our lives may be, perhaps most of it is incomplete. And when we experiment, we begin to open to that possibility, potential, and opportunity in ways that enhance and liberate our actual capacities, which are beyond everything we believe. In fact, I recently wrote an essay about our love of the impossible and how we really pay attention to a kiss or an embrace or an adventure or a meaning, perhaps a meal, that destroys the category. That peach we eat that is just beyond all peaches. The incredible enthusiasm for sports and music is an enthusiasm for the beyond of our ordinary humanity. How do we get there? By play, by experiment, by passionate departure from the prisoneering features of our rational thought and our common behavior and the priorities that most often pervade over it. Now, there's another view here which is also true, that deep, nuanced, careful attention to the ordinary task of something like taking out the garbage or washing the dishes or cleaning the house actually has the same potential and is a form of make-believe, in the sense that we must first realize the incredible potential of paying very nuanced, careful attention to an ordinary task. There are no ordinary tasks from this perspective. But let's have both and 3 more rather than 1. Sometimes when I adventure, I imagine that I am the one, and similarly I am the many, who has been chosen or has self-selected to become the between of my species and the rest of nature. I know a beautiful soul, an amazing man, who I love very dearly. His name is Ryan Firstdiver. And this man lives the bridging way very deeply. Where he lives in Lethbridge, Alberta, the rattlesnakes there are protected and the people are mostly terrified of them. He is not terrified of them. He adores them. And so he has become the one who is called when the terrified moderns encounter almost any snake or many other animals, raccoons, opossums, skunks, porcupines, and snakes. And so he goes to the places where the people are frightened. And they are often very relieved when he arrives because they feel he will cope with the problem of the snake. But Ryan does not see the snake or the animal as the problem. Rather, he sees the perspectives, the angle of approach, the kind of light the humans are shining on their experience, as tragically confused. And so, often when they express their relief at his arrival, he may explain to them, and he'll feel the situation out intelligently, but he may explain to them that he is not there to protect them from the snakes. Rather, he is there to protect the snakes from them. And in this way, he is a living bridge between the rattlesnake people and the humans. And by relating lovingly and intelligently and adventurously and curiously, not merely with the snakes, but with the situation, he becomes like a star that links the two peoples. And he gives the snake people the experience of being related with care and attention and love. Often he takes them to a place far from people, sometimes to a hibernaculum, which is something like a rattlesnake city under the ground. And very often, as is sensible, the snakes may return to where they were captured and from whence they were removed. And this is very sensible for a simple reason. The snakes have intentions and senses, and they go places purposefully. Of course, the humans merely want to get rid of the snakes. And in many cases, they would kill them, and sometimes they try to, if it were not against the law and punishable, because they no longer understand that the animals are peoples, the living places are peoples. And they have intelligence and sensitivity and awareness that is very different from the kind that drives rationality, which cuts things into parts, privileging some and disposing of many others in the process. And when we see in our human experience this function to cut things into parts so that many of them may be disposed of, we should be very suspicious. And often this is done under the flag of virtue. There is some evaluative proposition in which some are privileged and others are not. Some are celebrated and others disposed of. And when we see this happening, we should recognize that a schizogenesis, a shattering, is occurring. And much of modern identity politics and the combat over pronouns partakes of this very dangerous and at the same time this very dangerous counterfeiting of virtue. We can acknowledge and respond to the tragedies of slavery and dispossession, the tragedies of colonization, in deep and profound ways that do not partake of the silencing, the deplatforming, the eviction of specific others from our concern. We should notice carefully when the superposition of our humanity starts to collapse into measurement. This person is entitled to attention due to some representational status in thought or language. These other people are not. Now, certainly, when humans defect from mutual concern, adoration, wonder, play, exploration, and insight, we are free to select our position. But let's not be too quick to select one that dominates all others and literally declares to us what virtue is. Because virtue, like love, is exquisite and profound and infinitely dimensional. How rarely is it declarative? How rarely explicit? In today's physics, we have this concept that is largely the result of a particular group of physicists, led perhaps primarily by Niels Bohr. We have this idea that we refer to as wave collapse. And in this myth, in this physics myth, this physics religion, there are some who believe or suspect that the collapse of the quantum superposition is caused or invoked either by the participation of observers or by the act of measurement. And this is a deeply complicated and nuanced array of models, math, and philosophy. But most of the physicists who I trust about this, people like Lenny Susskind, who I encourage you to listen to, and people like Roger Penrose, deeply suspect, and perhaps even believe, that we've got something fundamentally wrong here. Either that, or we're missing a perspective that would deeply clarify this strange result that no one understands. And in physics, there's an aphorism related to this, which in English goes something like, shut up and measure. And what it means is open to interpretation, as all phrases are. But it means something like, pay no attention to the mystery, do the work, run the equations, do the math. I am in the path on the garden, and a truck is passing me. And this is a form of wave collapse. The living place has collapsed into a machine. And the machine dominates the entire terrain in many strange and ordinary ways. Shut up and measure. Notice the first thing that is said. The first thing that is said is shut up. What kind of a being, what is the purposive orientation of a being who would begin a conversation, who would begin an exploration with such a mean-spirited, adultish, and prisoneering phrase? And I'd like us to notice something profound about our experience as humans and our potential, which is this. When beginning something, presuming that things actually have beginnings, when beginning a task like the one I'm presently engaged in, our first moves create the stage. Oh, here's a bird who recognizes me, a male scrub jay, and he is waiting very patiently for an offering. I wonder if you heard his wing beats. When we begin a relationship with an offering, it's very profound. Right? There's no proposition of the expectation of a return on our investment, quote unquote, if the offering is truly altruistic. The very first moments in meeting another human, an animal, or a living place, and how we choose to play and be within that relational manifold are very important, because much like the purposes in our minds, they determine the forms of results, the forms of futures, the character of the timelines. There are probably nearly no situations, there might be a few, especially if I were triggered, that I would begin with telling someone to shut up. It is the end of dreaming, inspiration, wonder, curiosity, hope, faith, love. Shut up and measure. And you can hear a very similar purpose in the background. Of many of the imperatives of politics, religion, and perhaps particularly many modern branches of identity politics. They often begin by evicting some cohort they have measured and found in their measurement, often done in isolation and not within relation. They are collapsing the wave of our humanity to particular derivatives under the flag of the appearance or the counterfeiting of virtue. And I find this very dangerous, very suspicious. What would it mean to uncollapse the wave? To return dimensionality, possibility, opportunity to our common experiences of evaluation. I like to pretend that I'm a secret agent down here on Earth, if in fact Earth is down. And I like to make believe that I came here on a series of the most beautiful and perhaps impossible missions. And when I begin to make believe in these ways, incredible adventures often ensue. And many times they involve becoming the bridge between something that has been evicted from experience, relation, or thought by measurement. An angel once told me, you humans have primarily three powers: authorization, agreement, and measurement. And each of these powers is fraught with danger, particularly in our modern milieu. Surely you can see that when we think, even when I am speaking, I have authorized a particular angle or array of angles of perspective, purpose, intention, and inspiration. Without having made that move, I would probably be incapable of either thought or speech, certainly of perhaps action. Though there are ways of suspending these that are also very powerful. And we should attend both features together. When humans negotiate agreements, and by the way, my friend Ryan, his relationships with the living world, and with the rattlesnakes particularly, I encourage you to look him up on YouTube, by the way, if you have not already done so. Those relationships originate in an understanding of ancient agreements that were established between the living places, the animals and the plants, and the humans long ago, when the humans were new and vulnerable and delicate, which we still are. And so when he goes on missions, he is remembering and enacting those ancient agreements of mutual concern, mutual respect, acknowledgement, mutual adventure, wonder, mutual play, creativity, mutual discovery, mutual recognition and recollection. I see the shadow on the ground of wings, and I know that means the jay is coming. It has landed on a bench, and since it's not coming to my hands, I see. Okay, that was the male. And now comes the female, who will not come to my hand. None of the females have ever come to my hand. In my observations, the jays are often in pairs, and I'm going to dismiss the concerns of identity politics and gender politics here, because my direct experience contradicts their imperatives, their proclamations. The jays, the females maintain what I think of as a superposition. They remain above and out of danger, well, in a reduced relationship with danger, while the males will go and do the more dangerous and perhaps experimental behaviors. But the two of them are always together, and they attend each other's views carefully. So that in a sense, the female is the superposition from which the male will collapse toward adventure and perhaps into danger, but also into opportunity. And the male adventures for and with the female. Both of them are measuring, but they are measuring together for each other, not alone against each other. And that's the kind of measurement in which I deeply trust. Agreement, authorization, measurement. These are our powers, and they radically, their scope and potential is radically transformed in play, experiment, and adventure. The actual nature of experiment should not be to find out what is the case. Sorry about the bad machine noise. Again, a machine has come. It's making a terrible noise and it's flashing terrible lights. By the way, that's my measurement. And I authorized those perspectives, and I agreed with them before I measured. There's another loud machine sound. The terrible noise disturbed my train of thought. When we play an adventure, an experiment, yes. The experiments we do in our lives, the experiments we become, should not be bound to determining what is the case. Let us be clear about a single feature of existence. All of the features have infinite qualities. They are literally in a superposition. It is thought, concern, purpose, and behavior that collapse that superposition towards something. And many will argue that the incredible accuracy of relativity and quantum mechanics, right, accurate within, say, 8 decimal places mathematically, announces its verity and virtue. There are 0 formal ways of thinking that give us direct purchase, mechanical purchase, on certain features of existence that resemble physics, that resemble the authority of physics. And this is also dangerous because, in truth, as living beings, as souls, as humans, as organisms, as animals, something like 98% of the possibilities of beauty, adventure, and truth can never be collapsed to facts. Facticity, the facticity of mathematics and physics, are indeed profound and staggering. But we should recognize the limitations of their applicable scope. They are primarily used by humans to create machines. And most of those machines, if not all of them, obliterate living time, obliterate whole lineages of beings for the sake of a usually momentary convenience, or indeed for the sake of skipping time, or perhaps extending it. Clearly, our refrigerators and the purposes for which we build and multiply them slow time down in the dimension of what we think of as food. They inhibit decay, even though these words are value-laden and confused. Our cars skip travel time, our jets skip more of it. Computers are for skipping the temporalities that would be required for doing mathematical operations or logical operations. And there's probably a principle similar to the second law of thermodynamics that places severe limits on the amount of mechanical computation that can be safely done on living planets. But we have no such concept. We've decided not to measure that. We should notice when a manifold, a bubble of many bubbles, each a unique dimension of liberty, opportunity, potential, possibility, collapses under perhaps commonly held authorizations, agreements, and measurements. There is a family here. A man, I presume his partner, and probably their 2 sons are walking together, and they came to a branch and they negotiated together, somewhat verbally but somewhat non-verbally, which path to take. I watched them. I saw this. And they're still doing it. They're path selecting. And as they do this, they're not just negotiating which path to take. They're negotiating something that we could see, we could choose to see, as resembling the intelligence of the group and the authorizations, who we listen to, whose perspectives we agree with. And some of them are more vocal about it, and some of them are more intuitive about it. And as is somewhat typical in the West, the males are doing most of the overt activity, and the mother is kind of maintaining the waveform for the group. It doesn't look provocative or powerful, but without that presence, things collapse in ways that lead to results we would not agree with or authorize. We are having an adventure together, an adventure in awareness, an adventure in attention, and hopefully an adventure in learning and insight about not merely what it means, what is the case as regards our human existence and our existence in general, but rather a bit of a cautionary tale while at the same time an exhortation. The caution is to resist clumsy agreement to purposes we do not trust, purposes which we are easily captured by or captivated by, agreements we do not trust, and measurements whose facticity often belies the deeper and richer opportunity. The facts that dispose of possibility and potential. There is a scope, there's a useful and proper scope to the concept of what is the case. But at the scope of our lives or our being, our spirit, our intelligence, facts are a very small part of that. There is another feature of our interiority that is very profound, similar to the ideas of agreement, authorization, and measurement. It is observation. And in its more dire modern sense, surveillance. I found myself doing it without thinking. I had approached a tree and placed my hand upon it to feel it, to be with it. And I wasn't thinking about it, I didn't plan it, it just naturally happened. And as this happened, another family walked by. And the mother said something to her child in a language I don't understand. But I believe her child asked her, "What is the man doing with the tree?" "Oh, I've just walked into an angle of light where I can see the structure of the atmosphere's flows and transformations because of the little glowing stars that float around within it." It is an incredible example of what I was earlier remarking upon. And these little stars are mostly insects, but also fluffy seed feathers. I think the child asked his mother what the man is doing who is touching the tree. And perhaps I'm making believe here. I don't know what is the case. But something changed in me as I was being observed. And I began immediately to deeply attend and love the tree. Because because is the word that most often begins lies in English. But I was influenced by their observations. And this has happened to me many times before. And it's very surprising what occurs inside me because, so to speak, sometimes I will think I will touch and love the tree. But then when I notice someone is observing me, the charade falls apart and I actually feel the love. I actually feel the magical adoration. Now, some might say you are posturing for the sake of gaining the attention of others. And I acknowledge that we all certainly engage in some behaviors that are like that. But what about when they're two ways at the same time? What if somehow we begin by posturing, by making believe, and then, under observation or other transformations of the context, it becomes authentic and true and sincere and alive inside us and the tree. The difference between my thinking, I will love this tree, I will feel this tree, I will touch this tree, and the sudden, almost complete inversion of that into the experience of actual wonder, the felt sense of metaphysical beauty, suddenly having the experience that a moment ago I was, in a sense, playing at. Why? There is a great mystery here. Why would the observation of unknown others catalyze such a radical and immediate transformation, which I just experienced, even though I was speaking and had a mission. The transformation happened in the context of that mission. And I would claim that it was both, it partakes of a strange English phrase, the phrase, accidentally on purpose. Somehow something led me to reach out and place my palm and fingers against the bark of the tree, just as this family, probably from another country, was approaching. None of these things were present in my awareness, in my consciousness anyway, though perhaps I was subconsciously aware of them. But then when the child spoke, then in that moment, as if a magic spell had happened, suddenly I was not merely touching the tree. There was a bridge. A spark crossed a gap. A certain form of loving, ecstatic lightning leapt across many different gaps and lit me up inside. And I like to think it lit them too, though I have no direct experience of their internalities. I'd like to invite you to go on a little mission for half an hour or an hour, a mission into the land of make-believe. And in a sense, a rescue mission, a recovery mission, where we recover to our experience features of our nature, faculties, abilities, and purposes that are so easily dismissed, silenced, and disposed of by our focus on the facts. For the bird who selects the angle in the sun, it is not the facts that matter. It's what the light reveals. When the light becomes our companion, and we assume a multiplicity of angles of approach to experience, to seeing, to insight, that return liberties, opportunities, degrees of freedom, and that often do away with the constrictions, agreements, and authorizations, the measurements. We are trained to commonly obey and grant precedence to. So I'm inviting you to make believe and to set a time and to imagine a playful mission and to enact that mission with your heart and body in mind. To play the way we used to play as children in the profound and beautiful adventure of our existence. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon.